Right. And I am going to be admitting our incredible guests. So for those of you who weren't here last year, hello, all my friends are popping in. For those of you who weren't here last year, the first panel of last year's conference was also talking about issues of identity and diversity, because so many friendly faces. I get so excited. Again, PanParaCon was created in response to conferences opening up and in the middle of the pandemic, and this idea of like, how can we communicate with other people, how can we create community and still be safe, and the pandemic is still raging. So again, we're keeping this online. This is also an accessibility issue because not everyone can spend all the money that it takes to go to events around the country. But if you have an internet connection, you can hop on an online conference and have a conversation with some friends. And again, also because I have some strong Scorpio placements, get really angry at a lot of paranormal conferences that have lineups that all just kind of look the same, because there are so many people from so many walks of life who have experiences with the paranormal, experiences with the occult, just was weird and unconventional experiences. And why not give space for everyone to talk about their experiences with the otherworldly? I figured that term could kind of encompass all of the experiences with the unconventional, with the non-mundane. So if you want to go around first and introduce all of yourselves, I guess we'll start with you, Kai, since you are on my left.
Hey everybody, my name is Kai. I use they, them pronouns. I currently live in the weirdo city of Portland, Oregon. I am a Liminal Earth ambassador, so if you WUFO, you may have seen me pop in there a few times, and have also had a plethora of odd experiences. So excited to hang out with everybody. And I've been doing a little bit of behind the scenes social media posting for the PanParaCon crew, which is why you saw me pop in a little bit before everybody else.
Thank you. Dash, you are next in this lineup for me.
I don't know what it looks like from your side. Hi.
Hi.
I'm Dash, pronouns they, them. I paranormal investigate, and I run a tongue-in-cheek psychic advice podcast that we're going to do a live episode as part of PanParaCon tomorrow. Yeah, I live in Providence, Rhode Island, and it's lovely here. If you've never been, I don't know what I'm doing. Hi, I'm Dash. That's my whole thing.
I think that's perfect.
If you're gonna do this, you got to work in the showing off.
The nails?
Yes.
All right, Mortellus, you are next in my lineup.
Hi, I am calling you all from like a hurricane remnant bunker. It might get a little scary since I'm in a shed right now. So if I disappear, you'll know I was swept away, sort of Wizard of Oz style. I'm a witch, a mortician, an author, a necromancer, a parent, they, them, lots of stuff. And I'll use my intro to say hi to my kids, Soren and Luna, because they're watching our panel. They're tiny little 4-year-old selves. So hi, Soren and Luna.
Hello, my friends. All right, and then Nick and Leslie.
Want to go first?
Hi, we are sharing a space right now. My sister and our 2-year-old niece are visiting, and she is
Loud.
She has literally spent the last 2 hours nonstop running around the house yelling. And this is the only room where we're not gonna hear a ton of that. So we figured let's go ahead and just share a space. So we may intermittently be blurry, because this is where we're at. This is what's happening.
Amazing.
So,
Mine are 4-year-old twins, so it's nuts here too most of the time.
Yeah. So my name is Nick. I use they, them pronouns. I'm an occultist, a DEI advocate. I run a blog where I yell about fascism sometimes. We are both coming to you from the post-hurricane space in West Central Florida, where fortunately things weren't quite as rough as they could have been, but definitely sending good energy your way, Mortellus. Ian is not playing around.
Mm-mm.
I'm Leslie. I use she, her pronouns, although I am also very cool with they, them. I am a magic practitioner, and you may at this point know me for art stuff. I draw and paint things, and then I post them on the internet.
Fantastic. So again, like all my friends are here, it's very hard for me not to just like get into a very casual conversation talking about like inclusion and fascism, because that's what I've talked about, I think, with all of you.
Yes, please.
And that's why I also wanted all of you here, because you're all very open in talking about what it's like to be in a community of people who have been othered, right? Like we're all into things that are non-conventional, and then to be othered in that community, to be ostracized from the people who have already been ostracized. And I guess I'll open this up. What has been, I guess, the most frustrating? We'll start with the frustrations, then we'll get to the joys, right? What has been the most frustrating aspect of engaging with these kind of different spaces and having a marginalized identity and having that like reaffirmed, I guess, in these spaces that to me should be a little more open. We believe in Bigfoot and gods and aliens and all sorts of other things. So how do you express that in these spaces?
Everyone's so nice. No one wants to just jump in and talk over
No.
each other.
I was gonna call them Mortellus because they were unmuted.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Oh, I never mute. I always feel like that makes like this weird void of noise where people don't feel like humans. It's bizarre to me. I can't do it. But I've also got these to drown out all the chaos. But yeah, I think for me, one of the big things is it's weird how like we have this sort of I don't know, like demilitarized zone between the occult community and the paranormal community, but they don't play nice at all. I have been shut out from so many events, specifically statedly because I'm a witch, which is hilarious. It's weirdly sort of Christian sometimes. We've got exorcisms and priests and all this stuff, but then it's like, oh no, I don't think that will go over with our audience. It's just sort of hilarious to me how sort of strange that is. Has anyone else kind of experienced that?
No,
I think that there are a lot of ways that like, and I want to make this very clear that like this is not meant to be a knock against anyone who is simultaneously a weirdo and Christian. Like that's not
Totally.
what I'm talking about, but there are a lot of ways that like cultural Christianity has kind of seeped in or maybe was always there. And I mean, we can blame the Warrens till we're blue in the face, but like, let's be honest, it's more than that. It's a lot more than that. I think that some of it comes from the fact that a lot of the people who occupy both like a paranormal and like the intersection of like paranormal and like pagan spaces, it's not always, but it's usually people who are coming from an oppressive religious background who think that they have like exorcised the cultural Christianity from their perceptions, but have not actually. And you get that in all sorts of weird ways where it's just like I don't know, when we get to talking about like soul bonds and like maybe we should be careful with like who we're having sex with, for example, because we're creating a lifelong soul tie. I just get transported back to like 8th grade health class where I'm like taking tape off my skin and putting it on everybody else so we can talk about how dirty we all are. I think that, and like,
I did not go to elementary school or high school. Did that happen? That's so weird.
well, okay, look, I don't know if it happened everywhere. I grew up in the deep south. So like, I don't know what was going on elsewhere. I know that in Savannah, Georgia, they had us like signing abstinence contracts and all that because apparently that's their business at the age of like 13. It's fine. No one should interrogate that. Let's just let that go. We'll just let that be. But I feel like you see it in a lot of other ways too, and I didn't intend to like go ahead and get into this already because this is a spicy thing that a lot of my contemporaries are really not going to like. But I'm really tired of hearing about manifestation. I'm really tired of this idea that like constantly thinking about something makes it happen because somehow the universe, right, or gods or whomever are these like omnipotent things that like know your thoughts and make things happen. And it's one thing when people are talking about like what you perceive is your reality, right? So if I go into everything thinking that bad things are going to happen, now I'm subconsciously scanning for bad things. So of course I think that bad things happen. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about like you wouldn't stop thinking about this thing, so it's literally going to happen. Bruh, like I've had obsessive compulsive disorder my whole life. Now I don't know how familiar y'all are with what that means. Happy to explain it, if need be. But the short version is if thinking about something repetitively could make it happen, do you know how fucked I would be by now? Like, do you know the depth to which everything in my life would be fucked by now? It's pretty astronomical. So I feel like having, and I'm sorry, I'm taking up a lot of time here. If
we got 2 hours, you're good.
Okay. Look, I wouldn't say that I love the sound of my own voice, but anxiety has never deterred me from talking. So,
Can confirm.
if at any point you need to just like rush me out of here like I'm Lil Mama at the VMAs, please just play the music and kick me out. I will understand. I will get it. But you know, so I was diagnosed with OCD when I was 6, and it's kind of been like a lifelong problem, and I've been hospitalized twice. I've been on like a dozen different meds. I've seen specialists, like, and this is as good as it gets for me. So, you know, do with that what you will. I won't think about that for now. One of the worst experiences I've ever had with OCD is with the subtype of religious OCD. So literally everything I'm doing at this point in my life is kind of a victory, but it's not helpful to be surrounded by a group of people who on the one hand claim to be part of a community that is necessarily, if not post-Christian, like at times explicitly anti-Christian. And yet they're constantly still yelling at me about Satan and Jesus. And it's just like, how are we still doing this? Like, and how do you not realize what you're doing?
Well, I feel like also the sort of the fixation on manifesting and that sort of like that genre of discourse, I think is really sort of built and on just a sort of like bootstraps ideology too, that is like fully part of, you know, white supremacist shit of like, oh, well, if your life isn't the way that you want it, it's because you haven't done enough active thinking. It's not because of the system in place. It's just, it's your brain. You have to brain harder. And that's why your life is not where you want it to be.
That's an excellent point.
I'm all about impact and context over intent and manifestation. I don't give a shit what you meant to do or how you meant for it to turn. What matters is what happened. And like context, I think, is huge. It's far more important in magic and work than it is I think, given credit. For example, I think knowing something is half the work you're doing. Like once you think about something in its fullness, it affects how you interact with it. Like we don't spend a lot of time thinking about Frankenstein being a vegetarian, but it's explicitly stated in the book. And once you hear that sentence, you have to pause with it and you sort of readjust how you view the character. Right. Context is hugely impactful.
Yeah. And I didn't think about this until you mentioned it, Leslie, but this idea of this like Calvinist root that is still in all of us and still in all of our practice, and how you really have to work towards like rooting out all of these systems that get placed on you. But I really want to touch on too this idea of both mental illness, but also just neurodivergence, because you had brought up this idea when dealing with like older texts. Again, I have not been officially diagnosed, but I bet I
But
have
if you were a
ADHD.
gambling man.
Yeah, exactly. Which, hey, impulsivity, ADHD also.
Let's not interrogate it too hard.
But just this idea of, again, how do we like this kind of a purity, almost like we have to read the original texts in the original way that they're presented. And is that really serving people? Again, if we're looking at context and we're looking at relationship with the text, and we want to have these experiences, doesn't it like shouldn't we be broadening up the avenues for experiencing these other things, as opposed to saying like, no, unless you're reading it in this language or in this archaic
Right.
version of this language, you can't access the truth. And even the idea of asking for accessible measures, and some people even claim that it's like you want the easy way out. It's like, no, I just want a way that my brain will process this better and I can engage with this.
Also, I think that there is a world in which, like, first of all, it's super classist to be like, if you can't read this in the original dead languages, too bad for you. You're not a good occult person. It's like, sorry, that's not working for me. And also the fact that so much of the problems that are systemic in our culture writ large and in our smaller communities have to do with things that we are having a hard time unlearning. A lot of the homophobia and like weird correlations between sex and gender, and this idea that there are only two of each of those things, is based on old information from Charles Darwin. Like, we have microscopes and so many things now that Charles didn't have on the Beagle. He did his best, but there's so much that wasn't known then. Why are we still basing all of our understanding on texts from 400 or 500 years ago, 1,000 years ago? That's why I love Liminal Earth so much, is that like, we're like, nah, I don't need any of your stuff. Like, I'm just gonna make up my own things. I'm just gonna go out in my yard and find some rocks and acorns and like talk to the plants that live there about what I should be up to. Like, I don't think that which isn't to say we should throw away the entire past, but like holding it precious got us in the situation that Christianity is in, that got us in the situation that our country is in with the Constitution and those founding documents. Like, these old documents aren't doing us a huge favor.
Nick, I think you had a post a while ago about working with gods and deities in like updated and just sort of ways that make sense for now, and not being fixated on like whatever the old practice was. And I feel like that was like a brain blast for me, where I was like,
I was about to say, like, pal, it's your time. It is your time.
I mean, I think in so many ways that a lot of, it's funny that we so many, especially people who practice paganism, they can acknowledge that we're practicing religious practices or cultural practices, sometimes from cultures that don't really exist anymore in that form. but that because they don't exist anymore, we can't like go talk to somebody and say like, hey, you person who is following Asatru, who's following the same thing that they were doing 1,000 years ago, what should we do on Saturday? So like we can both acknowledge that these are like weird, not quite dead things, but like things from the past, but also because we're having to reconstruct so many things, that they're still very much living, breathing traditions. And in some cases, like Druids actually think that their tradition is living and breathing, but it's static and it doesn't make any sense. And I mean, Kai, I think you bring up an excellent point tying it to the Constitution in the US, that it's like it's the same thing, that was meant to be a living, breathing document that was an ongoing conversation with the present, and in some cases with the future. And it's wild to me that like, so I'm a Thelemite. My religious tradition is barely 100 years old, and yet it's like it's frozen in history in like 1947.
In some ways, it is already outdated as hell.
Right, like
as a Gardnerian, I feel that.
Yeah, I mean, my grandma was one in 1947. I shouldn't like. Why should I be like thinking the same thoughts that people were thinking when my grandma couldn't talk yet? Like that doesn't make any sense. Why should I be practicing religious thoughts? I mean, we are married. Why should I be practicing religious thoughts that are frozen in time from before our marriage was legal?
Which is also younger than our parents,
right?
Just to put that out there, you know, just in case anyone needed a new flavor to add to that.
So I mean, like, or why should I be practicing religious thoughts that are older than the concept of legal sodomy in the United States? Like that doesn't. None of those things make any sense. I used to say in college, and I've stopped saying this for a reason, but I used to say that I didn't want to listen to anybody's opinion that was made before people started pooping inside. Because it's just like such a fundamental, boring, and normal interaction that we all go through now, that like, I don't want to say that it shapes everything that all of us do, but like it's pretty foundational to how we think about moving through the world, that if we need to go to the bathroom, we can stay in the building. So like what other weird things about these...
Or like at least you ain't gotta go in the street.
Right.
Like...
So like what things about these traditions are reflective of times that are meant to be thought through the context of like, you don't go more than 10 miles away from where you were born ever? What kinds of things about these traditions are built around the idea that like after 8 o'clock at night, if it's the summer, and after maybe like 3 in the afternoon, if it's in the winter, it's just dark, unless you have enough money for firewood or candles. Like there's just so many crazy things about, and crazy isn't even the right word, but there are just so many things about all of these traditions in witchcraft and magic that it's old stuff built by old people who, I mean, some of them would be astounded at the fact that we have like mixed fiber shirts.
I'm not really interested in advice on how I should live my life from people who would be mystified at the existence of like a dishwasher.
Yeah. Or a lawnmower.
Like if the idea of antibiotics is too much for you to handle, let's maybe step away from the idea that you have too much to say that's worthwhile to me. I do think though that because I think that that's all true, and I also think that another issue is that people forget that more often than not, the texts that we have from these like, you know, bygone eras, TM, right, were not written by theologians, and if they were usually Christians. So people who strongly adhere to a traditional idea of like Celtic paganism generally don't pay too much attention to the fact that most of the writings that we have came from Christian missionaries who were transcribing these myths, shall we say, through their own lens. We don't have a written tradition prior to that, at least not in many cultures, right? Because I mean, let's not paint everything with a broad brush here, but it's the same thing with like Hellenic paganism, right? Like so many of the foundational texts that people will point you to are plays that were written by Homer, for example. Like, well, okay, but like my dude was not a clergyman, my dude was an entertainer. It's not that there's not still important information contained there, right? I mean, there's plenty of things that you can, you know, glean about Christianity, for example, through one of the millions of, you know, like young adult novels or movies or TV shows or whatever that are like, if not explicitly Christian, then like they might as well be. It's not that you can't get important concepts of what it is that Christians think and what Christian mythology holds, but it is true that maybe something starring Candace Cameron is not the same thing as like studying the Bible. And we also know that the Bible was not written by Jesus or his contemporaries. These were written by people who were like, yeah, man, like he fucking said this. Do you believe that shit? Like, no, I don't, because like I was not there.
They were elaborate fan fiction. It was popular to write fan fiction about
so like
Christ.
Not to get too chaotic here, at least not this early in the evening. Like everything is made up. It's all made up, and it is all matters of perspective. And it's not that these myths don't exist. It's not that the figures in them absolutely didn't exist, although we don't know that, right? Like, I mean, we can't know anything. But let's maybe stop insisting that all of our understandings must come from a time where people somehow had this access to pure truth, when in fact, these were plays. These were things that were made to make people with nothing better to do be a little bit less bored on their way to the grave. Like, these are not things that were meant to be deeply meaningful. Or maybe they were, but again, there's a difference between entertainment and theology. So it's not great to conflate the two, but it's even worse to suggest that somehow if you push beyond that, that you're doing it wrong.
Well, and even oh no, I was gonna say, and even if you are a person who reads old texts and finds a lot of value and meaning in things, I think the really important thing is the idea that it is okay to let go of things that no longer serve us or serve our peers or the people around us. I think that's the big thing, which is, you know, I have read a lot of old plays and taken a lot personally from them and been like, sick, these are great. I love this. Turning into ants, extremely cool. I love it. And you know, that's not to say that there is intrinsically no value in something that's old, but it is to say that there are elements that we have to be okay discarding. And I think that's part of it. And I think it's sort of tied into this idea of piety and sort of filial piety, this idea that just because something is ancient, it is worthy of respect. And that's something that I fundamentally disagree with. And there are plenty of ancient things and people who are worthy of respect, but not all of them. And that's the focus for me at the very least.
But let's be real, basing ideas about theology on plays has about as much sense as rebuilding Catholicism from that one episode of Schitt's Creek. Doesn't
might
work.
Be better.
It would probably be better.
Might be better.
I feel like we also were you.
I was gonna kind of shift the conversation a little bit. So if you have something else to say,
if it's
yeah.
Me too.
I think that another difficulty, right, is it's like, even if we go with the idea that like the only way to access things is by, you know, reading the ancient tomes, so to speak, even though again a lot of this shit was written in the last like century, right? Like, and a lot of it comes from like actually fiction. It's just that back in the day, right, when you didn't have the internet, just saying something was basically as good as it being true. You know what I mean? Like, me telling you something, that's almost as good as you reading a fucking book. So, like, clearly there must be truth here. It's really easy to call something the truth when you can't fact check it. So, but let's go with the idea that there's never been anything wrong with any of these texts. Even if we're going to read them, we have such a stigma placed on the idea of interpreting them differently than we would have interpreted them previously. So like Nick being a Thelemite and me being a whatever the fuck I am, like a thing that I've talked about a lot that immediately rules me out from even calling myself a Thelemite is that I think it's kind of maybe inaccurate to say that Crowley was a prophet. Some of that is that personally, I don't believe in prophets in the first place. I think that sometimes people pick something up and they're right about it, but I don't think that A, that means that they were chosen, and B, you cannot tell me that it has only ever been white men receiving divine messaging. Okay? You're not going to convince me of that. But let's go with the idea that somehow Crowley was a prophet. No, he wasn't, because he is not the one that channeled the messages. His wife channeled the messages. My dude was a scribe at best. But that being the way that I see things, first of all, I just started like 60 different fights on Twitter, and I'm sure of that. But it also immediately disqualifies me from participating in a community that in some ways, you know, purports itself to be like very progressive, but in other ways is really clinging to this idea that like somehow Crowley was the absolute truth when like, I don't know. Look, I'm not saying that substance abuse is a reason to not take people seriously, but I am saying that if all of your writings came from like a coke fever, maybe some of it wasn't on the money. That's all I'm saying. Maybe you missed something, maybe you've overstated something, or maybe you were just fucking around and I have no way to know that. It's not that I think that there's not still important information there, but even just the fact that I disagree about what his role even was in the first place immediately cuts me out of a conversation. And to go back to what we were talking about in the beginning, this idea that we must access like the ancient tomes, right? And that it's the easy way out. Like, okay, so what's fucking wrong with me wanting at least one thing in my life to be easy? Like, why? I'm not asking someone to spoon feed me my opinions. I'm asking for the exact opposite. But it really does feel like an extension of every other experience in my life, every workplace, every school environment, everything where I ever needed any sort of accommodation. People who do not have disabilities or who are not neurodivergent tend to think of accommodations as just being perks. And they look at it and they're like, oh, well, why do you get that? Because you don't fucking need it. That's why. I do. I literally need this. So, like, that's why I get it. Because I need it to function and you don't. But people can't stand that. So it's just like, so what you're telling me then is that I'm not trying hard enough when all a bitch is asking for is an audiobook. That's not that hard. Or to ask for things to be translated out of Edwardian English, like, that's not accessible to most people at this point. It's also, personal opinion, boring. So like, I'm not going to be able to pay attention. I have a hard time with reading comprehension. I have a hard time with focusing. I have ADHD, and because I have OCD, I always have like 60 different things going on in my head, and all of them are equally disturbing, and I can't turn it off. So sometimes I miss things because of that. It's much easier if I can be engaged in a conversation, and audiobooks kind of do that for me. And I know that we have a few people kind of in our broader community who are actually trying to make things accessible and actually trying to create spaces like this. Hopefully those people know that this is not like at them. It's extremely frustrating that it's literally built into the fabric of the way this broader community works, that like not only is it considered, you know, taking the easy way out to ask for accommodations to make something actually work for you, you also, if you are able to access those things, you are not allowed to have a differing opinion, even though we claim to be a group of free thinkers.
it's different ways of gatekeeping without actually calling it gatekeeping. It's like, oh, well, you have to do the work in order to be part of this. It's like, how much of this is work? And then again, how much of this are you just creating structures that just automatically filter out people that you don't actually want to interact with anyway, because you don't want to interact with anyone who doesn't look like you or think like you, or again, going to fall into these orthodoxies, which seem to pop up in all of these different spaces. I mean, Mortellus, you've talked about this a bunch as a Gardnerian, which like the kind of shocking amount of expectation of orthodoxy with gender and all sorts of other things.
I had to go through a lot of shit to get the requisite titles to then tell everyone else to eat a dick. Look, I started a fight on Twitter. Yay.
This is the spice panel. This is great.
Jimmy's must be rustled.
I think it's really interesting that the thing that you were just saying that I think ties into the original question, which is how you find sort of existing as a marginalized person in a marginalized space. And the idea of not being able to ask people for accommodations, not being able to ask people for things that you need, whether that is an act of change from the way that things are, or even just to be treated different. I think that it goes into what has been my experience, with marginalization, and that is just not knowing who you can fucking trust. And I think very early on, so I have been reading and doing all this shit on my own, but as soon as I started working on a pilot and actually participating, I would say, in the community beyond just my own study, you meet a lot of people right up front. And if you're new to this, which is wild because I've done social things before and I had the same experience then, and you'd think I would learn, but I don't. You meet, I found a book that was about exactly a thing that I had been thinking about. And I was like, this is amazing. This is life-changing. And I read this book and I was like, I got to talk to this guy. And I found his email address and I emailed him and we talked for an hour on the phone and it was great. And then he started talking to me about QAnon and I was like, okay, well, all right, whoops-a-doop, you know what I mean? But it's this thing where you can't, it is so hard, especially in a field where like you turn a corner and you can be like, hey, actually that the thing that I know you're joking, you did, it is a super anti-Semitic conspiracy theory that everything you're talking about. I know you don't know it, but it is. And it's hard to know who to trust. And I think that's sort of my big thing. And that's why I love a space like this where it's sort of at the very least, we are all bought into the idea that being marginalized is not a bad thing. You know what I mean? Like that is a bar on the floor, but it is a bar that a lot of people fail to.
They trip right over it.
Sometimes you think the bar can't possibly get any lower, and then someone shows up with a shovel. So,
right.
Like
James Cameron would have to dive for it. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it really, at this point, my experience with the paranormal community, with the magical, occult, yada yada community is very much, my approach is just, okay, but who all gonna be there? Like, I need somebody that I know to be there, and I need to know that that person that I know feels like this is an okay place to be.
I never felt more shut out from literally everything, like a door in my face, than when I put an ethics statement up in my press and media page. Oh, yep. Someone literally, a publicist literally told me that I was, quote, impossible to work with because I had an ethics statement.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
This is something that I get so angry about, that we have normalized, again, to Dash's point, like the anti-Semitic QAnon, and again, just all of these racist, horrible conspiracy theories. Mm-hmm. And that idea, well, but it's like, no, I don't care if they have the literal Ark of the Covenant. I don't want to talk to these people
right.
Because they are spewing terrible ideologies that hurt actual people. Mm-hmm. And again, that is my whole like ethos with all of this. It's like, okay, Great. You're into witchcraft. Cool. You love aliens. Awesome. You want to talk about the fairy. Great. But you have to put people first. Like, we are here on this planet interacting with each other, trying to be in community, trying to be humans who are all going through it in year 3 of a global pandemic, right? On top of everything else, right? And to not center, again, human relationships, interacting with people, and to sacrifice all of that, and to sacrifice people of marginalized identities in order to have access to some truths. Again, you are not somebody I want to talk to. Like, it's so funny because for PanParacon, I want an even more robust, like, you sent your ethics statement, Mortalis, and I was like, we got to do more. We got to make more of a stand.
No, you write all this stuff and you make it fit in like 2 sentences that are like, actually, I don't like anybody. Get out. The whole thing. I don't want to hang out with you. I'm pretty sure.
Well, it's interesting the idea of like of humans first, and I think what's interesting, even as you consume ghost show media or whatever, like, these people handle everything with an extremely like imperial and extremely sort of colonial mindset, even if they're dealing with something that they're trying to communicate with. And Mortalis, you talk about this stuff a lot, and I feel like I've gotten a lot just from listening to you talk about this, but people are disrespectful to other humans as well as the things that they claim to be very interested in chatting with.
Everything we want to ask the dead is about the worst things that happen to them. We automatically assume that they are male or female. We assume that the soul is a singular thing, which is the most modern Christian thing you can cram into a paranormal space. Hilarious to think you're not contaminating every environment with bits of yourself, if nothing else. That's a
Only
soapbox.
English speakers are ever ghosts. And if they were not naturally English speakers, they learned it upon dying.
Oh, yes.
I mean, I think ultimately a lot of this stuff comes back to the fact that a lot of people who engage with the paranormal, who engage with witchcraft or magic, that they're coming from a fundamentally conservative worldview of the idea that, like, we already know everything that is possible to know. So at this point, all we're trying to do is confirm that we're right.
Yeah.
Rather than saying, like, the world is huge and, like, everything that we can see only makes up like a tiny percentage of everything that is. So let me, like, be curious and see what's over there and see what that person has to say about these things. So it's like not important to question if everything that, like, has voiced some negative intention that you can't see as a demon, because like I already know that that's true. So, like, why wouldn't it be true? Or like everything that comes from the sky and, like, seems like it's in, like, a weird spacecraft thing is an alien, and that every alien is a weird thing that comes from the sky.
I always laugh when UFO go into a whole thing, because it's just like, I'm not even saying that UFOs aren't a thing, but I can't help but laugh because it's like, definitionally, all you're bragging to me about is that you saw something and didn't know what it was. Like, that's literally what you have just told me, is that you saw an object in the sky and couldn't recognize it. Like, that's all you're bragging about here. Like, bruh, raise your standards. Is that really the best thing that's happened to you all week, is that you saw something and didn't know what it was?
Anything could be a UFO if you're bad at identifying stuff.
Right. And once you know what it is simply an FO. And once it's not flying anymore, it is simply an O. Like, bruh, come on now. Let's maybe do a little less.
I started watching one of those bad ghost shows because it's fun, and I can admit that with only a little bit of shame. And one of the guys is like, has decided very early on that the fairies are actively trying to stop his investigation, and there's a voiceover where he's like, I don't care that they're trying to stop me. I'm going to get to the bottom of this. And it's like, I'm going to defeat these fairies. And I just think that there's something so beautiful about the hubris of white men. That's just like, say, hey, good luck, dude.
And it's just like they were not involved until they heard you say that, and now they're like, bet.
Well, and also like treating it like it's a video game boss that you have to defeat.
Right.
Like, I'll pull out my special move, we'll defeat the fairies. Like, again,
No,
go ahead.
I have to come back around to like demons and stuff. That's a soapbox for me. First of all, hilarious that we're not all applying that to bullshit like Pope Honorarius and the grimoires from 14th, 15th century, where we're trying to demonize necromantic practices as though pagans didn't think that everything Catholics were doing was weird and gross. We're not bedazzling corpses. That's on y'all. But who remembers chat roulette? Anybody?
Yes.
Come on, any person left in front of that screen for long enough will be a troll. And you're just going to. Why in the goddamn hell do we not give that much benefit of the doubt to the dead that show up for the random payphone on the street that is a spirit board? Of course they're gonna fuck with you. I would. If I answered that call, I'm gonna tell that guy I'm Satan. It's gonna be fun. Don't do it. That's what we got so many complaints last time, Steve. Gonna do it. I'm gonna tell him I'm Satan.
There's a show. There's another one of those same exact ghost shows that the entire run is based on one EVP from the first episode where something sounds like I'm a demon, and it's like, I don't know that's what they would say, right? Surely, if you got in touch with a demon, a thing that I find mostly apocryphal conceptually, is that the opening
unless it's
line?
my mother.
Not even a
Ghost
name.
was trying to bond with you over its love of Matt Damon, and this is what you do.
Right?
This is what you do with this conversation.
Oh my
Yeah,
God.
you channeled the sleeping Matt Damon. Good to yeah.
You know, I just get a lot of strong feelings about The Martian. Okay? A lot of strong feelings about it, and you've ruined that conversation. Now it's just a demon. We've ruined the arc of this conversation.
Why is it though that the ghost that shows up on the other side of the line isn't ever just really boring?
Yeah.
You know, I don't have anything to tell you. I died of old age here. Made
I led an
runs,
uneventful life. Yeah.
you know.
Yeah.
Or like asking questions back. Like there's never a ghost that's like, I died right before the series finale of Seinfeld. What happened? Like, tell me what happened.
Nothing.
I think Martellus is onto something here, though. It's the people who pick up the payphone. Like, of course, if you are just like you're gonna get like folks with a 12-year-old mentality who's like, is your refrigerator running? You better go and catch it. Like, that's the kind of like, if I'm like up or down or sideways or wherever it is that happens after I'm dead, like, I hope I have better things to do than just like sitting around waiting to see if anybody I might care about gets out a Ouija board. Unless we schedule that ahead of the time.
But if I'm wandering around the underworld and I hear one ringing, I'm getting in that though. Yes. Hello. Am I?
Satan, how can I help you?
Hold on, are you TikToking this? Good. No, cool.
Yes, what is TikTok?
Did you know that global warming is affecting us down here too?
It's very hot. There weren't always flames and stuff. It's just terrible.
It's, this is so funny because I hadn't thought about this until we started having this conversation, that there's this assumption in most ghost shows, right? Either we are dealing with demons, like actual demons, or we're dealing with people who are being completely truthful, like for this idea that once you cross over, you've just been purged of any trickster impulses whatsoever.
And let me be clear, I don't think lying is malicious.
No.
Yeah.
It's the chat roulette problem. I say
Sometimes
this all the
it's
time.
funny.
It's the dead are human, right?
Yeah.
If you walk into a Walmart or anywhere equally crowded, the odds of there being someone truly evil in there with you are so infinitesimal as to be statistically pointless to even consider. Like, there's not a Jeffrey Dahmer in your Walmart, but there's probably also not anyone truly good. There's not a Florence Nightingale in the Walmart at 2 p.m. on a Friday, you know? Everyone in there is the same flavor of shitty, just like you, you know? They're happy to troll you and be ridiculous because what else are they doing? If they're stuck in this shed in the woods in the middle of nowhere, if that's their existence and you're the first person to show up, I'm having fun with this, you know?
And even beyond that, like not only is no one in the Walmart a Jeffrey Dahmer, they're also probably not an expert on the specific thing you're trying to figure out, even as helpful as they might want to be. Like,
yeah. How did you die? I don't know. I was dead before nobody told me.
Can you tell me about the history of this place? I mean, maybe.
I can't tell you the history of the Walmart I'm standing in.
Like, I literally moved in and had a heart attack that night. What do you want from me? Like, but I feel like the fact that we approach, ghost hunting, which calling it that in the first place is already kind of its own whole thing, right? Mm-hmm. But we approach it with such like staunch seriousness. And that also kind of feels like a Christian hangover of like, totally. It's the strangest thing because on the one hand, right, like Christianity is, okay, I'm just going to say all my spicy things and start all the fights on Twitter, whatever. It's a death cult. No one can change my mind. So it's a death cult. Dying is the best thing that can ever happen to you. And everything in your life is this rehearsal for, whatever goes on later. Now, admittedly, in that rehearsal, you're supposed to do very fucking little, but whatever, right? Like, and at the same time, though, we completely avoid the topic of death. We venerate it, but we also act like it will never happen to us. And when it does, it can't possibly be an okay thing. So it kind of feels like a hangover from that to me, that we have, again, if we're going with the assumption that all ghosts are dead people, right? Like, I don't know, I'm a serious person, but like, I'm not that serious. I want to hear some jokes. I like to yuck it up sometimes. If you come to me and all you ever ask me is how many times I got stabbed, which like, I probably wasn't even stabbed to death. Like, do you think that's what I want to hear forever? Like, would you countenance someone walking into your home and yelling at you to square up and then demanding details about the worst things that ever happened to you? Like, absolutely not. You don't think these people want to hear jokes sometimes? Like, they're fucking dead. They're probably bored if they're stuck in this house, and you can't even come in with some levity?
And why is it that, when I'm watching other paranormal investigators, on whatever program or thing, they never account for sarcasm?
Yeah.
Right.
Ever.
There's this assumption that everything is sort of flatly delivered, right? There's no room for sarcasm or frustration or anger, and it's like, well, how many times were you stabbed when you died? Well, I'm going to stab you. Oh, that's very serious and real. But maybe they're just fed up with your ass, like.
Right, or at the very least, like maybe they're telling you the truth, but they're not answering the question that you thought they were answering. Right, maybe they're answering a question that they thought should have been asked, or they're not answering you at all, they're just talking, right? And you happened to catch part of it. But, when we hear someone, like if we were to get like an EVP of someone talking about a knife and blood and all that, like 9 out of 10 paranormal investigators are going to listen to that and be like, oh my God, we're in danger, when like maybe they were just trying to tell you how they fucking died. Maybe they died violently and they're answering the question that you asked like 5 minutes ago. and there was like a delay in the chat, and you didn't think to make that connection because you kind of just wanted to be talking to a demon. Like,
Maybe they're describing their job at a butcher shop.
Again, context, right? The context matters. And if you don't know the context of certain information, you're just projecting all of your assumptions. Again, your imperialism, your colonialism, all of your baggage from whatever your upbringing was onto the situation, onto, again, if you see them as people, onto these people. Like, if you think you're having a conversation, listen to what they're saying, you know, and again, don't just don't put all of your baggage on them. Like, really just let it live.
I was probably not going to say this ever. It's a thought I've had before, but it popped into my mind. So you get it. Here we go. If I could see an investigation where somebody is talking to someone who was put to death for being a witch, for example, where they didn't sound like they were having a lot of fun with how they died or that they enjoyed it because it makes good content, that would be super cool.
Yeah.
Yes. Why are we just sort of glorifying horror?
Right.
Yeah.
It's exploitation. Again, if we think that we're talking to people, we are exploiting people's the worst moments of their lives for entertainment, for clicks on YouTube, for TikTok views, for whatever, clout in the paranormal community. Although, what is that?
And it goes even more explicit too when you see all of the people who are doing like, oh, let's get a bunch of people out to do a paranormal investigation tour on a plantation or whatever, and it's like, no, it's the same thing of like, it is exploiting trauma. I mean, obviously that is worse than talking to someone about their individual death, I think, but it is a similar sort of exploitative mentality of this field that I think comes down to entitlement and ownership, and people feel like they are entitled to a spooky experience wherever they want. People feel like they are entitled to a practice from a culture that's just because it sounds interesting or cool to them or fun or whatever. And it is an attitude of entitlement from the investigators and spiritualists of a very specific hue, traditionally.
I mean, that's what happens when everyone who's investigating are cis-het white people. Like,
Fully, yes.
When you only move through the world like a cis-het white person, demanding that people do whatever you want with your big Karen energy, like, it's just that I think that one of the gifts of being a marginalized, like a member of a number of marginalized, like intersecting communities, is that although I was born white and have a lot of privilege that comes with that, I also have experienced that feeling of like, oh, I'm the only one in the room the way that I am, and that makes me a target. So I almost feel a little bit bad for, like, they're just out there kind of like smashing around, and there are opportunities in 2022, in 2020, in 2015 to know better. So I don't extend them some sort of grace, but I do think that I'm lucky, like, in some ways, to have this other lens of looking through things, because I think it does give me a fresh take. And I think that can be kind of a superpower for, everybody on this panel and a lot of folks watching.
Well, I think it's so important to sort of, as we frame ourselves in terms of not existing in the sort of the big, very obvious ways that a lot of cisgendered heterosexual people do, to not act like that. I think to your point, Kai, to not act like that is a get out of jail free card for us in general. I think, am very happy to start down a path and have someone say, actually, let me explain to you why that's the wrong path for you to be on specifically. And then it's like, oh, cool, I didn't know. Let me course correct. And I think I'm a, for a non-binary mixed race person, there are struggles that I've had for sure that other people haven't had, but there are a lot of struggles that I've not had, as a mostly able-bodied person, that I'm fully unaware of. And so the more I sort of listen to people who have been through things that I haven't been through, it's very disheartening to be like, oh, the whole system just bad, huh? The whole thing all bad. Cool. Good to know.
Yep. It's just bad all the way down.
This is great, really cool, really feels good on my insides. But it's important, I think, to sort of, I think the biggest thing that I try to take into all of this, because so much, at least for me, so much of the magical and the paranormal is about intaking new things and understanding new things and being open to new things. Because I think a lot of people, I forget who was saying before, a lot of people enter into something with the idea of like, I know what this is and I know where Bigfoot is because a computer told me, and I'm going to go shoot him with my gun. And I think that there's a lot of people who sort of enter into things with this idea of, I have a specific understanding of what X and Y is, and I'm going to go take a picture of it because I have a magic camera that's better than the millions of other people who have tried to take a picture of this thing. As opposed to the approach that I try to do, everything weird that I do, which is like, I don't know what's out there. Hopefully it's cool, and I'm gonna poke in a very respectful way. And I think that feels like the leg up that existing as a marginalized person in a marginalized field is, which is just like a reminder to myself to always be ready to be told that I'm wrong and to be told why I'm wrong, and to not be weird about it.
Yeah, you have to just say, I fucked up. Oops. It's not that hard. It's embarrassing, weird, and you just do it and you get on with your day. But I think too, there's this sort of, it's the weirdest and worst superpower. It's like if you sat around, you're like, what horrible superpower would I have if I were an X-Man? I would make all sodas go flat if I thought about it hard or whatever. Like, that would be terrible. That's just a villain. But when you appear to be a white, cis, straight person or whatever, and you're not, like, I have a degenerative disease, but I don't look like I have a degenerative disease, and I look white, even though I'm only recently finding out myself that I'm a mixed race person, because, oh, look, my racist family hid that from me my whole life.
Yeah, welcome to being a little bit Korean, Martellus. Hell yeah. Welcome to the team. What up?
But I'm the downy whitest person. Look at me. And that was my life's experience, right? Like, I grew up with people who talked about going to KKK meetings, and I'm like, I know this is horrible, and I'm 5. How are you not figuring it out? And I'm non-binary, I'm AFAB, I'm married to an AMAB person. We look like a straight cis couple. We're not. So these other like these cis white people come along and they'll be like, hello, fellow me type person, this terrible thing. And you're, oh no, you've misunderstood. I don't, this isn't going to fly.
Right.
I think a lot of this comes down to, though, like, we talk a lot about proof, and we talk a lot about, like, I mean, Vanessa, earlier you were talking about being people-centered, and we, as a community, all the scare quotes in the world around the word community, we only accept certain things as proof, and we only accept certain kinds of stories from certain kinds of people. So, like, I mean, I think a lot of this conversation that we've been having around kind of individual experiences is all of it's true, but like a lot of it wraps into that, like, as a community, we don't talk about the like UFO experiences of Black people. as a community, we don't talk about the like ghost experiences of East Asian people. And like it wraps in both that we don't count those people's explanations of their own experiences as being valid or being worth it unless they were backed up by a white person. But then also like the things that are, and this is a really big problem in my opinion, in like cryptozoology and in ufology, that like we only count sort of the kinds of proof that are persuasive to like really science heavy like hyper rationalists as proof. So like the only thing that's going to prove that Bigfoot is real is if somebody can drag a Bigfoot corpse in front of a TV camera
and perform an autopsy.
Right.
To like prove that it's not stuffed with newspaper or something.
Exactly. But like
Just
like if we think through like other ways of being able to prove things, whether it's about going back to folktales or to stories from specific regions, or being able to even just think through like, I mean, I know at this point this is probably a joke for all of us, but like what if Bigfoot is a ghost, or what if aliens are like the shadow of people from 200 years in the future, or something like that, and that just all of that would require way different proof than if we just assumed that like all aliens are like basically humans but with more arms or fewer eyes or something like that from like Alpha Centauri.
Well, Nick, to that point, even like another thing that drives me fucking crazy about every paranormal show is that they're like, well, what's the most compelling way that we can prove that this is a real thing? Let's talk to a fucking cop. Here's a cop. Here's a cop on the fucking thing.
Yeah.
And
No cop has ever lied before.
No, well, yeah,
they have to. It's in the law, right?
Yeah, but
I have a folder of stuff I got from the review.
But it's this idea of who are we framing it for, and you're absolutely right, where it's like, oh, who's the best person to tell us about UFOs? Gotta be someone from the military. And it's like, word, okay, cool, yeah, great. Or like, oh yeah, this cop said he saw. If I had a fucking nickel for every ghost show where someone's got a Blue Lives fucking flag on, it's like, what are we? I can't. It's infuriating because it is not only is it framing stuff in a way to appeal to a very specific kind of fucking dipshit. It is created in a way that makes it incredibly alienating to every fucking other person.
Yes. And to that point, what frustrates me is when people say, I don't want to get political with any of this. Yeah. This is the stuff that I do for fun, right? I don't want woke politics.
I don't want it to be any political other than my political.
Right.
Exactly.
Right. In which case, have you considered shutting up? Like,
I know.
When everyone listening rolls over to the tip jar, I want to see all cops are bad in the subject line.
Every single one, or we don't want your tips.
I'm as a person who is creating a show, an investigation show that I've talked to actually I think everyone on this panel about individually at different points. There's points where I'm watching where I'm like, I'm so fucking excited to be the only one where we never talk to a cop and never do a fucking exorcism. You know what I mean? Like,
I don't understand why it is that like we're having a national conversation about how PTSD impacts people who have served in the military, a lot of whom go on to become cops, and cops are basically militarized. So why is it that like all of these people who likely have suffered severe trauma have somehow a better memory than any of the rest of us? Like somehow their flavor of authority, it like makes all of that disappear. Like it's so out of touch with reality. It's
they're not trusting the military ones. They're trusting the burned out high school football star ones. Do you know what I mean? It's a different genre of cop.
I will say I have severe PTSD from childhood trauma, and it takes a lot of personal work to manage that I don't see white guys on the police force putting in.
Yeah.
I want to make
I
it clear
don't-
that I'm not laughing about your trauma. I'm laughing about the burned out high school football.
But no, I should not be
That was
wandering the streets
disrespectful.
with a gun.
It needed to
Right,
be
like-
said. I loved it, but damn.
Well, and again, this idea of like mental health support, right? Like if we, and especially too, I always think about Jack Brewer's book, The Grays Have Been Framed, and talking about how people who've had UFO experiences typically talk about them as traumatic experiences. So in and of themselves, they're traumatizing. And we're not having conversations about any kind of trauma work around any of this, right? Let alone like having trauma from being in the military or having trauma because, you know, you also had a horrible childhood. And again, work and consistent work it takes in order to be a human being just walking through the world. If we don't have these broad,
Sorry.
I was just gonna say we need to have these again if we're trying to be in community, in some kind of community, or at least trying to interact with each other. We have to be mindful of trauma, of mental health issues, and again this structural resistance to talking about mental health and again so many people acting like it's not a thing, or oh, it happened in my past, I'm over it. Like are you really? Because it probably changed your neurons and your cells. I doubt you're over it.
It's interesting. This is the another time that the word community has come up, and I think this sort of goes to a grander point that I've been sort of thinking about for a while as a trans person on the internet, which is I think the vast majority of the time when people say community, they're using the wrong word. And I think the vast majority of the time people mean demographic, because those are different words and they have to be treated as such. Because like I'm not in the same community as Caitlyn Jenner as a trans person. I'm not in the same community as Andrew Yang as an Asian person. Like these are people who are so separate from me, not just in terms of class, which is one of the big ways in which they are separate from me, but also just in terms of ideology and empathy and caring for people who are not themselves. And I think community is tough because we all want it to some degree, I think. And I think it is so much effort to build. Like we are all connected by one or another thing. And I still think this is demographic though. Like what you've organized here is the start of the process that builds a community. And that's beautiful and that's very cool. And I'm happy to be a part of this here, but I think it would be an error to say like this is a community. We are a community. We are a demographic with a lot in common from which a community can sprout. But those are important distinctions, at least to me.
I think that you're spot on, Dash. And I think another mistake that people make is that they conceptualize demographic as community. So then it makes it harder for them to push away people that have like no actual feeling of ties to that person or to other people in that community, in the demographic, beyond the fact that like everybody's really about aliens. But it doesn't make the space for like, Tom is actually just a huge asshole and is a misogynist and is a homophobe and like just shits all over everybody at any opportunity. But like Tom knows every fact about like, I don't know, the UFO flap from 67 to 72 in West Virginia. So like clearly we need him around and he's one of us. But it's like, no, he's not.
Well, and I think that it also like it not only makes it harder to kind of eschew people who really don't actually have a place in a community setting. I think that it also sets us up to disregard people who do belong in a community setting just because they don't fit a specific demographic. So I think that just to make it about my own stuff for a minute, right? Like as a queer person as a disabled person, a mentally ill person, a mixed race person. Like, there's a number of intersections there that, like, we probably share some of those intersections. We probably don't share all of them. That doesn't mean that we can't, like, all of us here, right? Just as an example, that doesn't mean that we can't be a perfectly functional community. But if we're only going by people who specifically match our demographics, we're gonna look to people who, I say this all the time, right? Like, the idea of like an OCD community, like, why? If that's all we have in common, if our mystical connection is that we have the same disorder, like, okay, cool, that don't mean we got dick to talk about. Like, because I don't want to be talking about this all the time, And so it's just like, not only do we eschew people who would make sense in a community setting and not get rid of people who don't make sense in a community setting, we're also kind of setting ourselves up so that we are only ever talking about the same shit. Because if the people that I'm supposed to be in community with are people who only exactly model my own shit, what do we have to talk about except for those things? It's exhausting. It's boring, quite frankly.
And I think there's space for a version of it, and I see this as I watch younger queer people fall for some purity culture stuff that is, right-wing aligned without even realizing it. And I think to myself, I wish, why is this so easy for younger queer people to fall for? And then I realize it's because their elders died in a pandemic, and we don't have because we're missing an entire fucking generation of people. And so I think that there's versions of it where, like, I was, as a mixed race person with non-mixed race parents, it would have been great to have a single other person who could sit me down and be like, hey, this is gonna suck so bad from both of your parents for a number of reasons, and just sort of walk me through things. There is a community, that there's a sense of community from identity that is important and valuable, and that is just to prep someone for, like, hey, you exist in a world that is not for you and doesn't like you, and let me hold you by the hand and tell you how to maybe navigate that a little bit better. To Nick's point, that I think is also even further complicates it, is not just knowledge, it's the idea of being in a community that has celebrity that also makes it very, very people are not willing to push off someone who is toxic or transphobic or hateful in a number of ways because maybe they have a TV show or maybe they do whatever. And I think that even sort of muddies the waters even more in terms of, like, oh yeah, like we are all, I forget who was talking about, Vanessa, I think you were talking about clout before, but like the fact that a version of this is televised makes the clout element even more bad.
Yeah, and I think that the clout chasing actually could potentially, anyway, as I understand it, come from a similar place as this: we must prove things and we must do so on the terms of other people. Because whether this has any basis or not, which, like, spoiler alert, I don't think it does, we tend to think that, and this I think is actually very, like, Puritan work ethic related. Clearly I have a bone to pick with Christians, all right? I realize that 90% of what I'm saying is going back to Christianity, bad, but anyway, we'll deal with that another time. I think that there's this sense of, like, Puritan work ethic of, like, if you are popular, it's because you're right about something. If you have clout, it's because you are right about something, when really your only credential is being popular. And that doesn't make you qualified to do anything except be popular. So, you can be someone with terrible ideas. You can be someone with, even if you have good ideas, you don't use them in a good way. You can be someone who doesn't know a goddamn thing about a goddamn thing, but enough people have engaged with you that now we've decided that you just have this, like, inherent credibility. And that, I think, really goes back to the conversation we were having earlier about who we will hear these stories from,
Yeah.
who we will believe about their experiences. You know, like as a person who is not only neurodivergent, but also like mentally ill, it is so hard to get people to believe me about anything, right? Because like I have OCD, I am also bipolar. And I'm sure I don't got to tell y'all about all of the bullshit around, like, first of all, it like ruins your spirituality to take medication, which like, I have to tell you, if taking your meds cuts you off from the spirits, it's because they weren't there and you were unbalanced. And that's why you were experiencing a connection to these spirits, is because you were unwell. That's not a shame statement. Like,
No.
as someone who has dabbled in, not reality at times, like, if I don't take my medication, my life is at risk, period. So if my staying alive brings down my vibrations, okay, fine. Like, what good is it to me to ascend to the astral plane if I'm dead? Like, what use is that? And
I don't know. I was just gonna say, I don't know if any of you all have read Ellen Forney's graphic memoir, Marbles. It's fantastic. And it talks about exactly what you're talking about, more from a creative aspect, but she really unpacks, they really unpack, I think, this idea that like somehow going on meds, like, yeah, like turns you into a zombie, which is a very problematic stereotype. Like nobody would say like taking medication for your blood pressure makes you a zombie. Therefore, like you are.
And the thing is, if it does make you a zombie, it's because you are not taking the correct meds or not in the correct doses. Like there's reasons for that. Like I am bipolar. If I do not take my medication, I am not well to a point that it does become dangerous for me.
Yeah.
And I think that not only do you have the, I don't know, it's like Schrodinger's like asylum almost, where if you take medication, you are, unraveling your spirituality, you are dampening your ability to experience things, ? But on the other hand, you must take your meds or you cannot be believed about anything. And then there's also kind of this like shitty other thing about like paternalism really seeps its way in there, and people do a thing of like, if you're mentally ill, you really don't belong in this field. It's too dangerous for you. You're too much of a target. Like, the demons want nothing more with me than they do with you. And in fact, I am experiencing them right now through this conversation. Okay? This conversation is the risk to me.
And this is the inherent ableism, though, because it is, there are people who say that if you don't have like a perfect body, that you can't participate and engage in ritual spaces. Right. That idea, again, this idea of like purity, right, which seeps into every aspect of it. You have to stand at this ritual for however much time. Some people can't. Does that mean they get excluded forever from this transcendent experience? Some people actually say yes. And that, so of course there's that mental illness aspect of it too. Martalis, I feel like you have been wanting to say something for a while, so.
Oh, I've just been doing that weird ADHD thing where I took notes of all the things I thought about saying.
Love it. Good. I always have a pen.
Say them.
It's like, which thing now? I don't know.
Yeah. Oh.
Dealer's choice.
Yeah, exactly.
I did want to go back to what Nick said about people who, I'm deep diving the past now. People who can offer credibility to people on the outside, like who gets to offer that kind of validation in these kinds of paranormal investigation space. The closest you get to see paganism in any sort of way is often the medium, which they often couch in spiritualist ideas in Christianity to make it palatable, I think. But the medium is never accepted on their own. They have to be surrounded by a passel of men with equipment. Ladies don't touch equipment. Equipment's for men, right? That seems to be the unspoken dialogue. But magic doesn't get to exist in this space unless someone is there with, some kind of device to make that real. And I think that too is kind of, it falls in line with what you were saying. But sort of bringing that back around to ideas about clout and who gets to speak for communities. And we talk a lot about who belongs and who gets to be in those spaces. And that dialogue is often directed by those people with celebrity. And the dialogue often surrounds qualifications, credentials, time in the community. But there seems to be no self-awareness whatsoever about the fact that they built their own credentials on the air live for us to see. But no one else can do that. It's for them. Everyone else has to build those credentials some other way. The bar has changed, and I think that's something we should talk about more.
Well, and it's also like people, they build a ladder and climb up, and then they just take it. And it's like, oh
Just we
no.
pulled it up with us into
Pulled it
into
up,
the
no.
attic.
You gotta claw your way to the top, baby. Like,
No, they push us into the Sims pool and they take us out.
and then they build walls around.
I think though that there is an additional piece to this that goes back to more tell us what you were saying about people building credentials. That like a lot of the activities that allowed you to build credentials, they're not accessible or activities in the first place. Whether
Right.
it's the difficulty physically of accessing certain spaces, because I mean, old buildings tend to have stairs.
I think
and
you're about
not,
to say exactly what I was going to say.
But just the cost
Right.
of traveling to these
Right.
locations.
Yes.
Or I mean, a thing that I think about a lot about a show that I think we all like, Hellier, is that like there's a scene in the second episode where Greg is talking to two men on their property, and in the background on these people's property is a Confederate flag. And like the first time I saw Hellier, I was like, I could not do that interview.
Yeah.
And neither could I.
Like I could not be in that community because they wouldn't talk to me.
If
or-
they let you live.
Or if they let me live, or I would just be like so squicked out that I wouldn't even give them the opportunity to show that they're like one of those like kinds of Confederate flag users that are like heritage, not hate, which like already is a confusing and terrifying thing to say, but like there's that kind of barrier of like, I don't always get to go in abandoned buildings because if the police come to the abandoned building and don't think that I should be there, that might be a fatal problem for me, as instead of just like the cops being like, you kids get out of it, got it here, or whatever it is that cops say to white people.
Right, and it seems like, oh, were you still talking? I'm sorry.
Go for it.
Okay, I didn't mean to cut you off.
Go for it.
It seems like in addition to that, right? Because like that's yes to all that. I mean, you started talking about what I was going to talk about, so nice. But I think that another problem, right, is that like the places that get picked the most often for investigations, it's not necessarily all places like the interview in Hellier where we're in a very white, very rural community, right? Where, it's not like they picked this place, first of all. It's also not like even if they had picked this place that they would have picked it because it was small, white, and rural, right? Like, that's not what was factored into the choices being made here. Nevertheless, though, if these emails had gotten sent to us, like, there just wouldn't have been any follow-up because, like, we don't need to get shot going to interview someone. And when I say we, I mostly mean you. I don't need you to get shot, ever, for any reason.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, it's okay. But I feel like even in larger groups, even on TV shows, all of the places that people know to go to, find ghosts or whatever, it's always either in like historical places that you have to pay for the privilege of entering, or it is places where, you are gonna just like go there when it's dark and like break into the window of this abandoned house when like you always might get shot by the cops for walking into your own fucking front door. So, let alone your own window, like heaven for fucking fend you ever lose the key and need to get in through the window, because that might be the last thing you ever do, and we both have to live with that knowledge. Everyone who is like you or like me, like by proxy, right? Like we have to live with the knowledge that every red light that you blow, every routine traffic stop, every time you forget your keys, every time someone thinks that you were reaching for a gun but you actually just had your fucking cell phone, like maybe someone just didn't like your face, like you could just not make it home at the end of the day. And that's a real threat that's frankly more important than if we are able to get evidence of the paranormal. So we choose places that you have to be able-bodied to get into. For the most part, I'm sure that there are some places that have a ramp or an elevator or whatever else, assuming that you have a physical disability. But most of these places do not make access for people who have physical disabilities and or disability aids, right? Like, I mean, you can't really get around, like the Winchester Mystery House, for example, in a wheelchair. It's not going to happen. They did not make space for that. But
no, I was gonna say not even like let's say that there is a spot perfectly accessible and it's and people have decided it's spooky during the daytime, so you don't have to be there at night and whatever. Just fucking getting there and all that. So
Just
like
affording it. Yeah.
I shot a pilot for a show about being trans and magic stuff, and I am so proud of it and I can't wait for people to see it. I had to pay for that. I had to save up money to get myself and the person that I co-host the show with and get us to a place. I had to put fucking miles on my car. I've been putting miles on my car for a long time. I hope that my car can take more miles. I had to put miles on my car. I had to spend money on a hotel and all of the permits to shoot in different places. And it's so fucking expensive, and that's for the pilot, you know what I mean? And then I have to take that pilot, and then I have to trick someone with more money than I have into paying me to make the rest of it, which I will fucking do. But it's hard. It's hard, and it is so fucking costly, all of it. And so, like, even if there exists this great, perfect location that is fully accessible and everything, you still got to get a bunch of gear and equipment and a hotel and all these things. And so the idea of credentials, which I don't even remember who said at this point, the idea of credentials and building your credentials, I think Mortellus, the idea of credentials and how you build those credentials on the air, even if you have the credentials to build, you still need to get the air part, and that is so fucking pricey.
Well, and I think that even when we're not talking about, because I mean, yes to all of that. I didn't mean to like gloss right over that. That's yes to all of that. I think that even when we're not talking though about like film mediums, right? Like if you ask even just like, you know, kind of small groups of people who don't film things and don't have podcasts and kind of just do this because they want to, right? They're not totally being malicious most of the time anyway. It's just that this is what they know to do. It's kind of like how there are a lot of people who do play into the idea of like, you know, like manifestation or of everything is a demon and everything that scares me is evil. They're not doing it consciously most of the time. These aren't people that have decided, I want to participate in something harmful. It's that we really don't give people the tools to have too many experiences outside of what we've already decided are the correct experiences. So, you know, I mean, one of the things that you've talked about a lot, and I don't want to speak for you, so like I'm gonna shut up after this, but like, well, to the ability that I ever have to shut up. One of the things that Nick has talked about a lot, that they are absolutely on the money, is that you can't tell me that it is only old asylums and hospitals and farmhouses that are haunted. You can't tell me that it's only ever white communities that experience hauntings. The last I checked, Black people die too. So, you know, and like, I mean, everybody fucking dies. So it's kind of insane to suggest that there are correct places to go to experience strangeness and I mean, we know to some extent anyway that we are capable of knowing these things, that there are some places that tend to be more active than others, But you also have to wonder how much of that is a default state and how much of that is because people have just decided continuously over and over again for however many years that these places are more active. So people keep going there. So activity keeps happening there, because if your whole thing is that you're dead and you want someone to pay attention to you, like, well, fuck, I mean, you're all going here. I guess I'm going there. You know, or maybe there's something about the energy that draw things in. We don't know how it works. And that's just my point. We don't know how it works. So why are we suggesting that we do in the first place? And that the things that we know must be based on the definitions of cishet, non-disabled white people.
I did want to say that Dash was talking about just the finances of going places. Sometimes even if you can afford it, that's not enough. My dear friend Stormy, she had the money, could travel, had the time, attempted to do an investigation at an asylum that's fairly well known, and they refused to let her investigate there, despite her credentials, despite being able to afford to pay to play, so to speak, because she's a sex worker, and they accused her of having other reasons for renting the location. So there's always going to be these boundaries around who's allowed to be somewhere. And I wanted to speak to, you were talking about Hellier and kind of what it's like to be in those environments. But I think often about the fact that I'm a rape survivor, and that's always in the back of the mind. And when you're talking about sending AFAB people, you're probably going to be the only feminine presenting person in a group of a bunch of white cishet dudes. They're the ones holding the cameras at 2 a.m. in this abandoned place, miles from anywhere. So that's not exactly a comfortable situation for most people. So how are you supposed to play when these are the parameters we're given?
That's it. It's all of these different layers of privilege that are invisible, and intentionally so. And again, it's just kind of accepted as, oh, well, again, that cis white male experience of being able to go to any town, to go in the middle of the night, to not have to worry about police, to not have to worry about being assaulted. And each of those is a layer of privilege that, again, is just part of that experience and then gets normalized as well. Isn't that everyone's experience?
I did also want to say, and I know I'm backtracking, ADHD is fun. Just leave this thought with everyone. We only ever see one medium on a team, but there are never too many guys with a camera. It's never a team with just one dude with a camera. I'm reminded of the Ruth Bader Ginsburg quote, "When will it be enough? When it's all of us." When I can see a team that's made up of more than one medium or spiritualist, and more than one feminine presenting person, or more than one Black person, or more than one LGBTQI plus person, then it will be enough.
And if it's more than one Black person, it can't be the Ghost Brothers every time.
Yeah.
Yes.
Like, I feel like that's a really, like, people are like, look at this diverse panel, and it's all white men, a white woman, and then the Ghost Brothers. And it's just like, I'm not even saying that they don't have useful things to say. Like, they should be invited places. This is not a knock against the Ghost Brothers. But, like, there are more than 3 Black people who are into this stuff.
You have not represented women or AFAB people on your panels if they're all somebody's wife.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Like, I want it to be known, okay? We're here on the same screen, but I came here individually, okay? I'm here alone.
You know what I'm talking about, though.
We're occupying the same
Little, of course.
It's the same group of people every time. And the pagan community has that problem too. You're going to see the same 5, 6, 7 people at every event. And why? Because the rest of us can't afford to get babysitters. We can't afford to leave our jobs. We can't afford to travel. They're not paying us to be there. We're paying to be there. And it is impossible to participate when that is the situation. if we're
Or
going to
it's
talk
the
about
circular
community,
problem of
and
you're
even-
not invited to these because you weren't invited to this. Like,
Well,
you don't have clout because you didn't have clout. Like, that's
Yes.
the
They
whole
also
thing.
like the structures that exist also select for a very specific kind of marginalized person to be the one person who shows up, because that's often a person who's gonna feed into other harmful shit or gonna not, stand up to other toxic. It's like how Hollywood only ever casts Aquafina in every goddamn movie. And as an
They're
Asian
like,
person, can I
really?
say stop casting Aquafina? Her name is literally making fun of what she perceives to be black people's names. That's a true thing. She stopped doing the AAVE thing, but it's still there. You can still see it. But it's, you pick one person who participates in upholding white supremacist structures, and that's your person who's like, look at our diverse group. We picked one, and there's the person, and don't worry about it. And that sucks ass.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's like we were actually talking about this not that long ago, right? Because it's like sometimes it's not even people who intentionally promote harmful things, right? Like Aquafina sucks for like 20
Really
different
sucks.
reasons. Like so many reasons. But sometimes it's people like how for a while there the only gay people you ever saw were like Neil Patrick Harris and David Burtka. And it's like it's not because there's anything inherently wrong with them, as far as I know anyway. They're not people who are out here intentionally promoting shitty things. Again, as far as I know, I don't pay that much attention these days. But
Morticia and me would be remiss if I didn't say that Neil Patrick Harris waited about 6 seconds after Amy
It's true.
Winehouse died to do a cheese plate of her corpse.
right, which was very, very ugly. Now I'm remembering that.
Super
Problematic. But all of that aside, the reason that they kept getting cast for everything that was supposed to make gay people acceptable is because they were both white, clean-cut, cisgender, and their relationship dynamic and the way that they, conducted their life choices, right? So being married, having children, there's nothing inherently wrong with those things, but these two men were the closest thing you could get to hetero without being hetero. So it was very easy to bring them in as the non-threatening queers who didn't really do too much to disrupt your idea of what, a fruitful life should look like. You know what I mean? Like, we weren't bringing in people who were really challenging notions of gender presentation or gender roles or, what relationships look like beyond the idea that marriage and children is the way to legitimize adult relationships. So they weren't intentionally problematic people. I fully believe that this is just what their relationship is. This is who they are. This is what they do together. This is what they wanted for their life together. There's nothing wrong with that. But that is not a representation of even the majority of queer people and the majority of queer life. And yet they were the only queer people you ever saw, them and Ellen and Portia, who also had kind of a similar dynamic of white, cisgender, non-threatening to heterosexuality.
They're still incredibly heteronormative.
Yeah.
There's a book called and I'm not going to say a slur on here, even if it's my slur to say. There's a book called The F Slurs and Friends in Between Revolutions, and I recommend it. You can find PDFs of it online. It's a truly life-changing book. But in the print edition that they just put out, there's an introduction by Larry Mitchell, who's the writer of it. And one of the really meaningful things to me is he had a quote about one of the best parts about being gay is that you don't have to get married or join the army. And it seems that the gay rights movement has decided that the things it wants most are to get married and join the army. And at some point, and I think this sort of speaks towards what you're saying about striving to be heteronormative. And I think that there is something much more powerful about us if we acknowledge that the heteronormative structures that exist are bad actually, and we don't have to model our lives after them. And I think that's sort of that quote lives in my brain. It's beautiful. Again, F Slurs and Their Friends in Between Revolutions. It's a really life-changing book. I cannot recommend it highly enough to the panel, and also everyone watching.
I wanted to
I think-
say,
And I'll just quickly, we are almost at time. So I guess last round of thoughts. Mortalis, Nick, you two seemed ready to.
we'll rock, paper, scissors for it.
Yeah.
I think just the thing that I was thinking about is that, like, this conversation that we're having about, because really this is a conversation now about tokenization, that, like, the other danger, though, is that we fall too far in the opposite direction, and we only make space for people when we feel like they embody the exact stereotype of the thing. So I'm thinking about, like, we only really hear about indigenous people in the paranormal if they're a shaman or if they're going to talk about a cryptid.
Meanwhile, hello.
So, like, we don't make space for indigenous people to talk about time loops or to talk about ceremonial magic or any of the other weird shit that we all will at least pay attention to. And I think that there's a similar sort of dynamic even when I think about the Ghost Brothers. Again, I love the fact that the Ghost Brothers exist, but, like, they all, I think, fit a very specific stereotype of Black men that feels safe and familiar to a lot of people who are not Black, that they feel recognizably Black, but they're not too threatening. Like, they're not thugs.
They got a good fate, but they didn't sharpen up the edges.
Exactly. And, like, that's the sort of thing that even, do people know what that means? Not necessarily. But like there's a lot of, as much as there's a lot of pressure for marginalized people to sort of demarginalize themselves to make them palatable, there is also pressure to, like, make sure that you're at least marginalized enough that people don't treat you like a dark-skinned white person or a man without a penis or whatever it is that's pulling you out of your, or putting you in your,
which is already a difficult idea because you can absolutely be a man without a penis.
Exactly.
I think that speaks, like, all of that really speaks to what I really love about the paranormal, which is that suddenly there's a celebration of all of these weird things. Like, if we really get down to the crux of it and we set aside all of these problematic things that are really just hangovers from the white supremacy, late stage capitalism growth world we've ended up in, like, it really is a celebration of the weird and unexplainable and unfamiliar and uncanny and queer in that, like, very true sense of the word. And I think that's why there is a good opportunity to start to create an intentional community within this kind of thing.
That kind of comes back around to what I was going to say. Something silly, but it passed through my mind earlier that, you know, we always talk about umbrellas for communities and we put heavy air quotes because those communities don't fit together. But I think we're a community kind of like a bowl of Halloween candy. You might not ordinarily eat Twizzlers and Warheads and a Snickers bar together, but on that one day a year, those things can come together and they work and they fit. And we don't have to like everything in that bowl. Maybe that store brand, you know, Tootsie Roll thing at the bottom is the fascist or whatever, and we just kind of ignore that one and throw it out later. But we do get those days where we all get to come together in a way that fits, even if it's chaotic. And I think that's colorful and beautiful and fun. And I appreciate moments like this where we get to celebrate that.
Amazing. Again, we're almost at time. Thank you all so much for helping me start off PanParaCon with this very spicy chat, which I have enjoyed very much.
Follow-up interviews. I want to hear them.
Of course. All right, great. Yeah, follow everyone on this panel on Instagram, on Twitter. I mostly am on Twitter, so that's why I'm always like, hang out with my friends on Twitter. But they also, in some cases, do art, write books, do cool things. So please be sure to check them out. All of their links are on our website, panparacon.com. again, thank you all so much. Yay, friends. So in 2 minutes, we're going to be talking with Cassandra Snow and Siri Plouffe about their new book. I'm super excited about that. And in the meantime, I think we've got like 2 minutes of intermission.
Yeah.
I'm going to use that time to say goodbye because it's been kind of scary here.
Oh my God, Mortellus, I hope you are
Stay
safe. I
safe,
need to light a
Mortellus.
candle for you,
Yeah.
seriously.
I'm in a garden shed listening to things fall on me. So.
Smash that,
Goodness.
smash that tip jar button. Don't forget to write that all cats are beautiful in the note. And some of us, we will also see, I'm going to point this out, we will see Mortellus coming up tomorrow. We will see Leslie on the panel coming up, and we will see Nick on Sunday. So
And Dash, we're going to see tomorrow.
and
I'll be there
Dash
tomorrow
this,
at 4 p.m. Eastern time.
Heck yeah.
Doing my
well, that was
goofy
the first three people I remember, I'm sorry, Dash, were the first three brain
So
cells, and the
offended.
fourth one is just like, I'm done, I'm out. Like
people are gonna tune into this one and hear me say insightful things about race, and then tomorrow they'll be like, "What the fuck are you talking? What is
we celebrate. I you know what though? Everybody, like, I love the people involved in this, where nobody's one dimensional. We
all contain multitudes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was originally gonna do a bigger thing about like, and I might do this another time, because I do feel like there's more to be said, but I was going to do a thing specifically about OCD in the context of the para-weird stuff. But I have had far too much going on lately, so I was kind of just like, what if
No, you're already
I
booked.
hopped in and threw that in occasionally while piggybacking off of other comments.
You just
Perfect.
booked yourself for 2023. And I would like to, I am also an OCD person, so I would like to hear what you have to say about it.
Word. Okay, well now I'm terrified that I'm gonna say all the wrong shit.
There's nothing wrong to say. It's just.
Well, there is, but only if you don't have OCD.
I feel like everybody, all it is just saying, we all hate the show Monk.
Monk is to OCD what Pretty Woman is to sex work. Okay, like.
Mickey Rooney to Asian people? There's a lot of.
Yeah.
We should go to the next thing because this is rad. That's going to be rad too. So
yes.
We'll have a year together.
Listening.
Thank you.
Thank
all
you.
so much. This was
My
amazing.
friends.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye.